Hi everyone, welcome back to Runes of Risk. Today we are tackling one of the most casually misused and widely misunderstood concepts in cyber risk management, the difference between risk appetite, risk tolerance, risk threshold, and risk capacity. Most cybersecurity professionals, even experienced ones, casually throw around terms like risk appetite and risk tolerance as if they are synonyms. But they are not. They are very much related but not exactly interchangeable. These terms, risk appetite, risk tolerance, risk threshold, and also risk capacity, each has a specific role in cybersecurity risk management. Let's break them down visually and understand why getting them right is absolutely critical. Let's start first with risk appetite. This is your organization's strategic comfort zone, the general level of risk you're willing to take in pursuit of your objectives, defined based on the organization's overall risk capacity. Think of it as a dial or a speedometer with low, moderate, high levels. A bank, for example, may accept low level of online fraud as a trade-off for offering 24/7 digital access to customers. That is appetite, a strategic directional guide defined by the leadership. It informs prioritization. Where do we accept risk and where do we invest in stronger controls? Now let's talk about risk tolerance. And this is where many people get it wrong. In most frameworks like COSO or ISACA, risk tolerance refers to the acceptable variation within your appetite. So if your appetite is low, your tolerance might allow for a 10% deviation from that. It's a band of flexibility, not a red line. It allows business to operate with realism, knowing things don't always hit exact targets. For example, if your uptime target is 99.5%, you still tolerate up to 99.3% occasionally. Or your fraud loss limit is 90,000 USD per month, you may tolerate 95,000 USD if it is isolated. But what happens when things go too far? That is where risk threshold kicks in. Risk threshold is the red line, the point at which your risk becomes unacceptable and action must be triggered. The threshold is what determines escalation. In our fraud example, if monthly losses exceed $100,000 USD, it crosses your risk threshold and that should trigger a response, not just a report. And then finally, there is risk capacity, often overlooked but absolutely critical. Risk capacity is the maximum level of risk your organization can absorb without threatening its mission or its continued existence. It is not what you are comfortable with. It is the limit of what you could theoretically survive. For example, a large bank might tolerate up to 100,000 in fraud monthly, but its capacity could be USD 5 million before systemic risk kicks in. Thus, risk appetite sets the strategic direction, risk tolerance defines acceptable deviation, risk threshold marks the point of escalation, and risk capacity represents the absolute limit the organization can withstand. Together, they form a layered boundary risk model. Appetite is less than tolerance, tolerance is less than threshold, threshold is less than capacity. Let's apply this with a quick real world example. Say you are a mid-sized bank. Your leadership sets a risk appetite for online fraud at no more than $75,000 per month. They define a tolerable band of 10%, meaning up to $82,500 might be accepted if it is isolated or explainable. But the risk threshold is clearly defined at say 90,000 USD. Anything above this must trigger an urgent escalation. And the risk capacity? That is your uppermost boundary. Maybe $5 million USD in cumulative losses at which point the business mission itself is under severe threat. When each of these boundaries is clear, your risk team and your executive leadership can make decisions faster with less confusion and far better alignment. If your team doesn't know the difference between tolerable risk and threshold breaching risk, you will either overreact to noise or miss critical signals. And remember, regulators increasingly expect to see these definitions clearly mapped in your policies and registers. Here's how to implement this practically. First, define your risk appetite by category, such as fraud, data loss, downtime, etc. Then document risk tolerance ranges, how much variation you'll accept. Set risk thresholds for key indicators next, the point that triggers escalation. And finally, know your risk capacity, even as you hope never to reach it. So the next time you review your cyber risk policy or present to the board, ask yourself, do we know our appetite? Have we defined our tolerance bands? Do we have clear thresholds tied to action? And do we understand our risk capacity if things go really wrong? Because that is the difference between a documented risk program and a properly governed one. I am Rashmin Sanvatsarkar, and this is part of the Runes of Risk video series. If you want clear, practical, and accurate insights on cyber risk, such as this one and other deep dives, please subscribe to the channel and follow along. Remember, precision matters, especially when it comes to risk. Thank you.